Hello, everyone. It's John Kraska with EveryLibrary Live, EveryLibrary Institute, EveryLibrary itself. Folks, it's another wonderful opportunity of a good conversation with some smart person or people about what's going on in library land these days. There is a tremendous amount of activity that we do here at EveryLibrary around preserving, safeguarding, doing some block and tackle kind of campaigns to make sure that there's a future for libraries in towns and cities and counties all around the country. There are over 9,850 administrative units for libraries in the United States, public libraries, where sometimes it's one town, sometimes it's one zip code, sometimes it's one building. They're sprawling major metropolitan ones as well. But each and every one of those places is rooted in the community's life, the community's well-being, individuals, families, folks who are looking to maybe read something for fun, be edified by what they read, move on to the next part of their lives. So what we want to do today on EveryLibrary Live is have a big chat with a wonderful author and a new friend of EveryLibrary's, Linda Kushner, about her book, The Fight That Saved Libraries, A True Rhode Island Story. Linda, I'm bringing you on the camera now. It's a real treat.
Hello, everybody.
Hey. So thank you for being with us today. I want to read your formal biography, and then I want to chat with you about the book and about your experience, okay?
Sure.
Great. So folks, happy to introduce you today to Linda. Linda Kushner is an author, a former Rhode Island State Representative, and a longtime community activist. She served in the state legislature from 1983 to 1994, where she championed progressive causes, including LGBTQ including LGBTQ rights, gun control, and educational equity. In her new book, The Fight That Saved Libraries, A True Rhode Island Story, Linda chronicles the grassroots campaign that preserved Providence's neighborhood libraries from closure and privatization. And Linda, that's right up our alley. She is a passionate advocate for public institutions and civic engagement who continues to inspire a new generation of activists committed to equity, access, and the right to read. Again, welcome. Thanks for sharing some of your time with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it's a great read. We are in the activism business here at EveryLibrary. I spend a lot of time on the ground, as do many of my colleagues, working with folks who are in the trenches. And you were in the trenches, but you also had something which is very nice to be able to catch up with you about, which is some remove from it and some time to reflect. You know,
well, the best thing is that we had success in the trenches, and it's a good guide for how to deal with bigger problems, which now are on top of us, I think.
I think so too. So you have a long career in politics. Libraries are political. A lot of people don't want to think about that or admit it, but it's how do we choose to tax ourselves? You've had a great public service career. How did you get into politics back in the early 90s?
It's very strange because I actually was raised in a very cultural home. Art, music, dance dominated our house, but I did go to a progressive school based on the Dewey system, and it did involve the students in problem solving, both in the school and a bit in the community. And I didn't think too much about it until I finished college, of course, still being in the arts, art history, when I discovered real life. It came crashing upon me, and there were problems that needed to be solved. There was a racist governor running for against the president in Baltimore in the 60s, where I had to come out and solve that problem. And one problem led to another. And eventually you realize the best way to solve your community problems is to go to be in politics, so you can talk directly to yourself, not just lobby politicians, but be the politician who is lobbied and gets to speak out.
Well, I think that's very interesting. The solution to the problem, is us, the people who care, but the enactor of the solution as an elected official, that not everybody goes down that path, Linda.
No, but it becomes more and more possible as you really look at the situation. All of our government, at least up until this year, has been controlled by local politics. You start at the beginning. I actually started a little higher up. But once you're solving a problem, you know more about that problem than most people, and you have a practice of garnering support. So you just translate it into political support, and then you take that political support and deal with the problem.
So there was a significant problem in Providence a few years back that you detail in The Fight to Save Libraries. Can you take our viewers through a little bit of the backstory?
Sure. Um, we came to Providence in the mid-60s. I immediately found my neighborhood library, which became our weekly destination, both for my husband and myself, and later for children. And what I didn't realize was the Providence Public Library, of which I went to one branch, was not a public library. It was actually a private institution that the city was contracting with to run its libraries. It had started out as one that was going to be, it was 130 years old, and nice group of gentlemen were going to give library service to the people of Providence. But after a few years, they decided they needed some money from the city, so they asked for a little bit. City said, fine, this is wonderful. But by 2005, the public, through its taxes, either local or state, were paying for 60% of the operating budget, and yet we were not having any input into what was being done. So the administration of the library was threatening and did close branches, did get rid of children's specialists, child specialists, which are very, very important. They're the nexus group, I think, for connecting the community, particularly teenagers, to the library. So once we found out about this, and I began to become involved, this is post-politics. I'd already been a representative, but I became involved with the library itself, one of the friends groups, and discovered this adverse relationship between the administration of the library and the public. Then we began to do work.
Well, you even mentioned in the book that it's a divorce that happened between the Providence Public Library and the community as such. Things sound like they got very broken at one point.
Well, it was crazy. I mean, what really started it was I think it was in 2000, and my dates keep getting mixed up now, but in 2003, the library, crying poverty, laid off 60 library workers. Some were clerks and some were librarians. And that affected the service at both the downtown central library, which is the apple of their eye, and at the branches. And at the same time that they laid all these people off, they decided to move a door at the cost of $200,000. So library patrons marched downtown, and I went down to see what was happening. And there was this woman with a bullhorn shouting, at people to get organized. I didn't know her. And it turned out the person who gave her the bullhorn didn't know her either. She had been called up and told, this is important. You're a union organizer. You have a bullhorn. I need it. Give it to me to use. And she did. And that kind of energy is what really brought this whole movement together.
That's really extraordinary. You mentioned in here in the book that a few days after the passage of an ordinance that the PPL proposed closing 6 branches: Fox Point, Smith Hill, Onlyville, Knight Memorial, Woonsock, and Washington Park, which had already been shut down, if the city did not increase their funding to $3.7 million. They explained that these library closures and attendant staff cuts would provide $900,000 in savings. I mean, from sitting through legislative committees, appropriations hearings, all those kinds of things, that the money drives the conversation, but tax money makes Americans crazy.
But in this case, it wasn't just money. It was a misconcept that what was important for the board to do was to save its endowment, not fix this library. So although this library had 100, depending on what year you're talking about, $140 million. I think I have this right.
Yes.
They did not use. They would not use this to fix leaky roofs, which were causing buildings to close. It was just crazy. So it was a mindset that was nobody could fathom until finally we secretly created another library. The library, the Providence Public Library, had the city over a barrel, or whatever that phrase is, because they said, if you don't want to use us, you can start a Department of Libraries. Well, that would be enormously expensive for a rather small city. Or you can find another 501c3 to run it. And there was no such thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, the city had to keep agreeing. But we secretly formed this new library, the Providence Community Library. We met and we did the bylaws and we secretly filed the papers. And then we waited to see what they did. And when they came out with this announcement that they could not afford to run 5 libraries and they were going to shut them down, we stopped and we stepped up to the microphone and said, oh, but we are an organization that can run libraries, and we can run all 9 libraries for $2 million less than they're asking. So that was quite a surprise. Boom.
It is the moment in the book that made my eyebrows go up.
Yeah.
The idea that there's a big conversation happening in this country around privatization. Privatization of libraries is happening in certain communities. There's a big effort, as you know, around privatizing public good, whether it's K-12 education with vouchers and charters. My hometown my hometown neighbors here in Chicago privatized all their parking meters. And yet
Oh, yeah.
what you did was you took something not private, but you took it extraordinarily public,
That's right.
and not in a venture capital sort of way, but the use of the word community in that library title. It's quite the coalition that can come together and not only do activism, but do organizing to the point of creating a new 501c3.
That is really interesting. Libraries are an institution that bring together more people than anyone thinks of.
Mhm.
I mean, when we were trying to build up support for this, we, contacted the social service agencies because we thought they needed libraries to help with their children. They pointed out to us that they needed libraries to be open, particularly in the poorer areas of the community, which were being threatened, because people needed to come in and use a computer to apply for jobs or to apply for assistance.
Mhm.
And now this administration seems to want more and more of us to use machines. Anyway, that was a whole new use. We never realized that was so essential to the community. So
Well, it
I
is
think we have to
Yeah,
go
a
right ahead.
lot of the conversations about libraries do revolve around the children, and the children. How do you get 1,000 books before kindergarten privately, individually? How does any individual family really do that? You need a library for that.
Right.
The children with summer reading and the summer slide and helping kids find that good book that's just fun to read. But we don't usually emphasize those parents' stories like that, and that's
Yeah,
very
I
important.
think the strength of a library is through its adult readership because everybody said, oh, I went to a library when I was a kid, or I took my kids to the library. But the important thing is, are you going to the library and what can you find that will satisfy yourself as a grown-up, that you can put your feet up and enjoy? That library is waiting for you to come if we keep it there.
I agree. So talk to me a little bit more about the coalition that was put together to build this movement to save those libraries.
Well, it's very interesting because the four of us in the center of it had very different skills. I came from a political background and also an organizing background. The woman with the bullhorn was an academic. She had never led an organization or a movement of this size.
Mhm.
And she had great knowledge of libraries and history, et cetera. The third and perhaps the most important person was Ellen Schwartz, who was a mathematical type, an accountant. She was not afraid of numbers. She was the one who was able to point out of this $140 million endowment that supposedly could not be touched. A large part of that was not truly endowment. It was just savings that the library had tucked into the endowment to make it untouchable. So
Mhm.
she was very important. And the fourth person who came along later was a man, Marcus, who had come from the business world, had business skills, and most of all, he had business cool, because after 3 or 4 years, you can tell the three of us were really hot and we needed a cool demeanor there to handle things.
I
And the
love it.
organization was reached out. We made sure that the committee that was working on it had representatives from every single library, not from the library themselves. They didn't have friends groups, some of them, but from people who went to all those different libraries. And then we started reaching out on our Rolodexes to who we knew. I knew union leaders because they had supported me in various elections. Someone else would know academics. Someone else knew all the accountants. And so you kept reaching out and getting a larger and larger group. And that's how we developed the political strength.
Well, there's two things that come to mind as you're describing this. One is the movie The Untouchables, which when they were going after Al Capone, they had an accountant on the team because they eventually got Al Capone with the accountant, with the IRS. The other is that people come to these kinds of causes for a lot of different reasons, and being united in a purpose towards something as important as saving these community anchor institutions. You said that you're from a family of readers, but and you're obviously a politically active person. But what about the library campaign caught your emotional or moral attention?
Well, in part, I thought it was so disgusting that the libraries that were being closed were in the communities that most needed them. My house, you can't see it from this picture, has piles of books, but there were many, many houses in Providence that the only book was maybe a Bible, maybe one other book. So to cut that resource off from the people who most need it really ticked me off.
Hmm.
Um, and then there's the absolute joy of watching people enjoy what you're doing, your result. I mean, it has a very fast return. You do something and then you go watch the kids or the group enjoying that thing that you did. It's easy to love a library.
Yeah.
Actually, that's a good slogan. Easy to love a library.
Yep. Well,
And
one of the things.
librarians are so nice. People love librarians because they don't tell you how stupid they think you are. They keep it all a secret. They just help you no matter how dumb the question or how hard the question. They're there. And they run the library so smoothly that you don't realize their problems until they come up.
That is very true. We run into that all the time where I tell this story to librarians sometimes about how they've done so well doing so much with so little for so long that they've, in a certain respect, become aesthetically invisible in the community. They sort of are part of the background. They're in the wallpaper, you know? People don't notice because they don't toot their own horn. And yet, if you have a multi-year campaign going on, you have to be focusing not just on the buildings and not just on the institution, but you've got to be focusing on the people who are putting library to work as librarians in the library workforce. You have to be.
But, we take libraries for granted. We take them for granted like we take public education for granted. Um, but, and even as involved as I got, I still never really put it together that when those books that are being transported from another library to my library, it makes it possible for me with my little library card to get books from the entire state.
Mm-hmm.
And that this was being done with federal money, which is now being threatened. I mean, I can't believe it. If we can't transfer the books around, the larger libraries will be okay, but the smaller libraries that I imagine in rural areas will be very badly affected.
Well, you're speaking my language here. When it comes to the situation around the Institute of Museum and Library Services and the supports it provides to each and every state library, in my home state of Illinois, your home state of Rhode Island, interlibrary loan is the biggest thing going. In my local library here in suburban Chicago, we were 42% bigger. I know this because I was on the board of trustees for my local library. We were 42% bigger because you can get stuff from down the street or all the way across. I mean, from
Right.
Lake Michigan to the Mississippi.
Right.
And I appreciate you bringing that up. Is there a lesson from your 2014 campaign for what's happening right now to libraries and other public institutions in 2025?
Yeah, there definitely is. As a matter of fact, my book, which I thought was a document of telling how we saved this library, turns out to be a how-to book on community organizing. And community organizing is what you need to have political effectiveness. And it really sets out all the steps. I didn't think of it that way until Paula Vogel, who wrote the cover flap for it, said it's a go-to book.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, as brilliant as she is, she was right. She hit it on the nail. So I think one of the things is to recognize how many groups are affected by a library and to immediately bring them together to save that library. Start at an individual library, a little library or a big library, whatever it is, and bring in all those groups. Second, work your way up the political stream. It really makes a difference to the city council person or the town council person or the city, school committee person. Unfortunately, some of those people are opposed to libraries being free and open, but to most people, to the great majority of representatives in our government at every level, it makes a difference. So when they hear from people that are close to them, it makes a difference and it will work up the chain. So I think we need to use the same technique for dealing with this federal mess as we did with the Providence local situation.
So it's a different being, and I mean, in a certain respect, the Providence campaign, the fight that saved libraries, you were an outsider, after having been an insider in the legislature. I mean, are there substantive differences to that, or is it just a consistent through line of getting something done?
I don't feel the inside outside so much. As a matter of fact, I took such wild bills in the legislature that sometimes I was the outside in
There you go.
but I do think the idea is to focus on the problem, to see what the problem is, and then to build a coalition and to get all these people to use their different talents. At one point, we said to everybody, get out your mailing list, Rolodex, call everyone you know.
Mm-hmm.
And we were able to do that. And because, again, I say, as I emphasize in the book, because Rhode Island is a small place and Providence is a small place, it seemed you could affect things with a smaller number. But every single district, my husband and I were talking about whether there were more people who held library cards in a congressional district or who were registered to vote. When you consider children have library cards, that gives you a help. On the other hand, maybe the important question is how many voters have library cards. Maybe that's the thing that needs to be started, to have a library registration going. Maybe that's where you start to increase the number who then will affect. But these are the kind of little things that need to be dealt with.
It's interesting that you bring that up. We do have here at EveryLibrary and the EveryLibrary Institute, our nonprofit side, two different initiatives that are focused on voter access and voter enfranchisement. We have our Libraries 2025 campaign. We've had a couple of Libraries 2024, 2023, et cetera, to educate voters about issues that are impacting libraries at the local, state, and federal level. And then we have an initiative called Vote Libraries, which is intended to help support voter registration, ballot access, polling place. The library as a civic node is more than just meeting room spaces. When folks want to get together and chat, it is the infrastructure of democracy. And I do feel that there's going to be an extraordinary role for libraries moving forward as voting rights becomes more and more fraught, because the library has a statutory responsibility to do things like, in some states, not every state, but it has a statutory responsibility in certain places to be a voter registrar even. That's basic.
Oh, that's something. We don't have that in Rhode Island, but that's wonderful.
We should run a bill, Linda. We should run a bill.
Right, but we have, we have. That's an interesting idea. I have to chat it with some friends, But I think to get the voters to become library members, I think that, and that's different. You were talking about getting library members to become voters. We need to increase the pool of people who go to the library for enjoyment. Yeah,
I mean, I hope that everybody who wants to use the place feels welcome and can use the place. That'd be awfully nice. There's some people who will never be big readers, despite the fact that, I mean, it's a lifestyle. It's a vocation. It's a thing. But my goodness, let them at least have that one book a year that they want.
But libraries have changed. Our libraries now really, reading is just part of it. I mean, there are so many activities that are sponsored and makerspace where people come and do painting or whatever they're doing. Dance, Zumba classes for children and young children. So it's a joy of community. And community activities and housing community activities. So
I see your record as a legislator in Rhode Island in the State House as being fairly progressive, and I think that you're proud of that. I mean, anti-discrimination, gun control, different social justice issues, and the way that you're talking about libraries sounds like it's pretty well lined up with that.
Yeah, actually, the law that I'm most famous for in Rhode Island has nothing to do with all those far out things. It has to do with controlling the debt of the state, which was, again, I never thought I'd do that, but there was a problem. And what, with this old, you see a problem, you try and do something about it attitude, I was in the middle of that and successful. So
I got two more questions for you, Linda, tonight.
Yes.
Today I want to wrap up with you. One is, what's it like for the library community, for the community and the community library in Providence right now?
Well, our community libraries, they did change their name. They're now called the Community Libraries of Providence, which is great. We always had a problem with whether to put an S or not in there. They're doing very well. And they actually, the statistics show that they are the second largest lender of books in the state and the first largest lender of children's books in the state.
That's
so they're
amazing.
Really functioning. Of course, they're scared to death about budget cuts. both locally and nationally, because we have an education problem here that's impinging on libraries. But they're still functioning beautifully as the moment that I speak. Um, and it's just a pleasure to go in and see them working.
There is something very hope-filled. Once in a while, I get a chance to go to a community where we've done a campaign. We've
Mhm.
helped in some material way. And I remember very clearly driving from DC back to Chicago 2-3 years ago after the pandemic was all hot, and I realized I was about to go past St. Clairsville, Ohio. That if I got out the expressway, it wouldn't just be a quick stop at McDonald's. I could go to the library that we helped win their
Right.
first local levy.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And I did. I showed up. They didn't know I was coming. I didn't know I was coming. And just to be able to be in that room, I did knock on the director's door. It was a delightful conversation. We took some pictures together. I got the 25-cent tour. But Linda, just being able to be in that context was so edifying.
Yeah. When you think of, I mean, we have been in existence, I think it's 16 years since we won that. We got the city contract and we saved 5 libraries. So there are still 9 libraries in Providence, plus the downtown
And
central.
they did fix the roof, right?
Of course, but it was very hard, not as detailed. That's still problems. It's still Peter to Paul situation. Sure. But to realize there's an entire generation of children who passed through that library, and some of them went on to further education because they were exposed and cultured by the librarians and by volunteers and librarians to help them with their homework and get them through. And it makes you really proud. In the book that I wrote, I never expected to write the book. I really thought that Patricia, the academic one who knew about libraries, was going to write the book. But her books were very dry history of libraries, and they didn't have all the juice. But she said, in her book, she said a quote from me that I never expected to be the mother of a library. But having become one, it's one of the most gratifying things I've ever done. And that's still absolutely true.
Linda, that's absolutely beautiful. Okay, my last question for you today. It's the Trump years again. It's a very different set of Trump years right now, and what's happening in America around IMLS in Washington D.C. The impacts it's going to have to state libraries and to state government, of course, but very locally. Your hometown. What advice would you give to somebody else who's got a hometown library that might be in peril, it might be difficult, it might be fine, but we want to inoculate against trouble? What advice do you give to somebody who would want to start their own campaign to either save or transform that library?
Well, it's very important that there's so many issues that are under attack by the Trump administration. And I can understand where Congress people feel overwhelmed with where do you start. But it's very important that library lovers put this issue front and center. And to do that, they have to, first of all, make people aware of the danger to their local library. Even if you start with something like interlibrary loan, which is very clear. It's an easy one to see. Mm-hmm. And then meet at your library, bring in a few people, see what their skills and contacts are, bring in a few more, and start contacting up. It's a long haul, but it's very doable. I mean, I don't know if you always win it, but it's doable. It's not something that's dangerous to do, not yet. And it just takes persistence.
Well, it's all 5 of the freedoms of the First Amendment are on display at the library. Of course, there's freedom of speech. We talk about that all the time, but that right to assemble and that right to petition, that's part and parcel of it all. So, Linda Kushner, you've been absolutely wonderful today. I want to put up on the screen where folks can get more information and order your book besides Amazon, but you can get it to your local library too. Go to Saved Libraries.
Local library only if it's in Rhode Island.
My apologies, the Rhode Island Library.
Because somebody would go to a local Chicago library and not get it. So you come to Rhode Island and buy the book. That way, by the way, all the money goes to the libraries. I don't keep any of it. It's for them. So
absolutely lovely. Linda, I did not. I knew that. I should have said it. It's on the back cover.
All the money, all the proceeds go to the library. If you buy it at the library in Rhode Island, they get all $15. If you buy it from Amazon, they get less, but they still get everything that comes in. So it would be wonderful to have your support for our library system.
I love your commitment. That's a hell of a sales pitch. Folks, thank you for being with this conversation between me and Linda today. It's a good chat. It's a smart move to get organized, to make those conversations happen with your neighbors, and to move that moral conversation forward about how do we want to govern ourselves. Linda, thanks for sharing with us today. I can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, we're going to wave
Enjoy.
goodbye, and I'm going to put up the card, and we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.